bàbá wa bàbá mi èṣù wá èṣù wá èṣù.
Anu Nation is home to the Anu spiritual order founded by Chief Jegna Haru Yuya Asan Anu. Some of the components of Anu Nation are Anu Life Global Ministries, Enlightenment and Transformation, Sadulu House, and Osiris Life Spiritual Services. SaduluHouse.com is the school component of Anu Nation, where spiritual empowerment through education and training is emphasized. One way that is accomplished is through our monthly webinars. Our webinars are packed with foundational information, rituals, and live instruction to empower your spiritual work. At SaduluHouse.com, you can view our diverse list of topics for this year that range from meditation to sex magic. And you can also register for any of the webinars at your convenience, sign up for our introductory Orisha class, schedule a spiritual reading, and sign up for the Anu Spiritual Training course. Enlightenment and Transformation is the media component of Anu Nation. Here, you can view all of our archived shows from over the years to our current segments. They include Chief Speaks, Masterminds Monday, Anu Asafo, Thunderground Thursdays, and Foundational Fridays. You can also visit us on our YouTube channels. They are Enlightenment and Transformation, Orisha Yoruba, and Anu Nation. Osiris Life Spiritual Services is for those who are ready to take the necessary actions to bring your life into holistic balance. Here we offer consistent monthly one-on-one coaching, solutions that are tailored just for you, practical hands-on self-development techniques that will accompany your monthly readings, and customized practical strategies designed for you that guarantee positive results. Simply choose the package that best fits your needs. And last but not least, AlphaOmegaStore.com. The Alpha Omega Store is our online botanica where we offer divination tools, herbs and incense, DVDs, books, and other hard-to-find ritual items. You can also get our best-selling foundational book, Grasping the Root of Divine Power. Other great works from Anu Nation are Shrine and Altar, Solutions for Dysfunctional Family Relationships, and Natural Hair for Young Women. All great books to assist you on your journey. To find out more on how to get involved with Anu Nation, visit our websites and YouTube channels and be sure to sign up for our monthly newsletter.
Peace, good dawning, and welcome everyone to another segment of Enlightenment and Transformation. Another segment on Enlightenment and Transformation. Of course, you're listening to the Sunrise Salutation or the Dawning Devotional. You know, I name it something different. each time we do the segments. But in either case, you're listening to the community show on enlightenment and transformation. And I am Chief Yuya. And of course, I want to welcome you all. First time listeners, those of you who are catching us, for the first time on this beautiful Monday dawning. And for those of you who have been riding all along, welcome. And I trust that you enjoyed your strong in and the things that we've been speaking about, especially the things that we've been speaking about or that we spoke about on Friday's segments. You were testing out, trying out, and able to apply over the over the strong end. All right. So before we even get started, I just want to give you all the call-in number for anyone who wants to call in and share a relevant and responsible testimony, or wants to ask a relevant and responsible question, or just share some information with the family. Let me give you the call-in number. It's 515-605-9862. And I do understand, we've been going through that for a while, that some people have a little bit of trouble calling in on that particular line, depending on your phone, who your phone carrier is. And like I said, I'm going to say it again. We're going to be getting rid of that number probably around the solstice, because essentially we'll be getting rid of the blog talk experience around the solstice, because as many of you know who've been listening, they changed our number, as they did with a lot of people. It wasn't just us, of course. And a lot of people who have been having the same exact issue, depending on if you have, T-Mobile basically, or Metro PCS, any subsidiary, is very difficult, or they will charge you a penny a minute or $1 a minute. Okay, so based on that, we're gonna chuck these folks up out the window. All right, so we're on here and we're talking about authenticity. The title of this dawning show is Why Knowing Yourself Brings Value into Your Life. And let me say peace to the chat room. I'm pausing a little bit. You can probably hear the hesitation in my voice. I was over here trying to pull the chat room up while I was talking. All right, so I was a little slightly distracted, but I got it up now. All right, so chat room's in my face. Just this is like doing these segments with all the things I have running here. It's like piloting a ship. I have all these different controls that I have to keep my eye on. I told myself soon what I'm gonna just do is just have someone come in and monitor and engineer for me, so I can kind of keep myself focused more on the information, on what we're talking about. But until that time, so we're speaking about why knowing yourself brings value into your life. And like I always kind of let everyone know, make sure, if you can, if possible, when we're doing these segments, that you go back to some of the older segments, especially in the beginning of the year, and try to count down on them. And I know it's a lot of information, and I don't think I should have to make any apologies about that. I think it being a lot of information is a good thing. So, you just got to work your way through it, of course. And if you're able to do that, it will help you to kind of put the whole picture together. Of course, when I speak and I do these segments, I always try to reference back and say, well, I did a show on this, I did a show on that. I do that not to, again, like I said, to brag that I got all these shows. I do that to give you cross-reference points, so that way you'll have the opportunity to kind of like, just put the story together. Anytime you're researching or reading something, what you want to do is you want to do it in a comparative sense. That's important. So, and in that comparative sense, I'll say, okay, well, there was a show on this, a show on that, and maybe that will help you to kind of, draw out a bigger picture, to understand a little bit more. So again, I advise you to, go back to the earlier segments if possible. And like I said, the year itself, there's a movement of a certain thought and a certain idea. And what we're speaking about this dawning takes us in that same direction. Okay, why knowing yourself brings value into your life. We're speaking about wealth building, but not just wealth in the sense of how do I get money? Because getting rich and getting money, once you start to develop a certain level of spiritual or even metaphysical prowess, you find that that's not actually that hard. It's fairly easy, especially because of the amount of emotion surrounding the aspiration of getting it. When you start to put that language of emotion, into the work that you do, it's very easy to manifest the things that you want. But being rich or getting money doesn't necessarily equate to wealth. That's why you have so many people so many times who will maybe even win lotteries, and they'll win those lotteries and then they'll lose all the money because they have a certain default in their mindset where they're used to a certain kind of struggle, or they're used to a certain type of deficit model that they live their life around. So subconsciously, even though they may be sitting on top of 10, 15, 20 million dollars, they'll go broke within 3 years because subconsciously the mind is that powerful that it has to recreate that environment that they're most familiar and comfortable with. So once you start to develop a certain sense of strength in terms of your work, you start to see sometimes maybe the overhanging, more powerful principles that you want to tap into and want to be a part of your life. All right. And let me just say peace to everyone in the chat room. Sister Marva, Spirit Driven, Michelle, Brother Byron, JR, Justin, Sister Nicole, and, Shamika, and anyone else, Darcy, of course, who I may have missed. And I see a question. Oh, Maria as well. I see you. I'm not used to seeing your name in there. But, I guess the two Nicoles, I should say, because we got more than one Nicole in there. Brother Byron says, Chief, I have a question. Please, does the term Liko mean anything to you? Liko, Leko. Well, somewhat. Liko is actually a language. So that's probably the most that it means to me. It's actually a language that's spoken in Nigeria. I think more towards going more out to the right, so more towards the east. I always tell you all how bad I am with maps. But I do know that is a language that is spoken in Nigeria. So yeah, that's the most it means to me. In terms of word value, yeah, I could do a breakdown on the actual symbolic value, but that's the most that it means. So if that means something or helps you, let me know. All right, or give me the context. Oh, okay, you see, in my capoeira class, we were singing a song to Loya, who I broke down as Oya, but was unable to translate to Liko. Oh, okay, so it's a language. Yeah. So yeah, you just gotta, get that lexicon for the language to break it down. But yeah, it's a language. Okay, so outside of that, man, and Akaro, Brother Haru. Yeah, Akaro. So this is of course, in Skype drops. All of you on YouTube, I know you can still hear me, And actually, it's not even Skype dropping. I'm finding out it's actually Blog Talk dropping the Skype connection. All right, so you're all going to hear some noise in a minute. You're going to hear me call back in. All right, please excuse all this boop, 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 boop. You get to hear all of the
Since it appears
action.
you're calling back into a live show, we are
All right.
reconnecting you now.
Come on, darling. Bring me in. All right. So we're back on it now. It's so interesting. I don't know if any of you have noticed, but whenever we get that Skype drop, it always happens right in the beginning of the show. And then it doesn't really happen for the rest of the show. Usually the Skype will drop maybe sometimes 1 minute before the show, or it will drop 1 or 2 minutes into the show, or right now we're at the 15-minute mark. It's always around that beginning, but it's Blog Talk, But it's all right, because we're gonna make tracks on Blog Talk. I would literally do it today. I think I paid my monthly bill with them already. So I would probably do it to the end of that billing cycle, but I want to give people time to catch up to the fact that I'm leaving, because a lot of people, when they listen to these segments, they listen to them like months in the rear. Because I speak to some people and they're like, yeah, I'm still cutting through them, so they don't hear the most current ones all the time. So that's why I'm gonna wait for a month or two, and I just keep announcing it, and then we're gonna get off of Blog Talk, and I may provide a phone number for calling after that, or I may not, because it also seems that you all are loving this chat room enough anyway. So, I may not even need it. And truth be told, having that call-in number is always like a hit and miss, to be honest with you, because I might get a lunatic that calls in. So sometimes people call in, they're a little nutty or they're disrespectful. And so it's always like a hit or miss. Sometimes it really distracts from actually delivering the information. So back onto the subject, and again, peace to everyone in the chat room, peace to everyone on Blog Talk, as well as those of you on YouTube. Welcome, of course. And today's gonna be good for you. It just is. Just think about it for a second. It is. You could feel it. I know you can feel it. Today I had some real angry birds outside of my home this morning, but aggressively happy. I guess maybe they were having some trouble getting the foliage, to move in the direction that they needed it to. That's my theory. And again, I've always had a theory that it is the frequency, because those birds, they represent different frequencies, but it's the frequency of the birds chirping that actually cause the plants to unfold in the dawning. It's one of the reasons why they do it. And they were real aggressive about their work this dawning, man. Real aggressive, chirp, chirp. I looked out, I thought I saw a man in a tree in a bird outfit. They were real aggressive. So I said, yeah, today must be building up to be a real good day, because they're not playing on their job today. But yeah, peace, Sister Ma'at, as well as Brother Nahum. Peace to you all. Yeah, man. So authenticity. I want to start here, man, in terms of our thinking about it and how we posture ourselves to it when we speak about I and who I am, and when we say things like I want to live my true self or be my true self, right? And the self is such an illusionary term. I'll be honest with you, because when you get right down to it, when you dig into it and dig into it and dig into it, and you get real smart about it, you realize that there actually is no self. At the end of the day, there's only the awareness of the experience of life and how life is forming itself into different variations, into different shapes, but there actually is no I in self. But we won't go that far down the rainbow yet. We'll back up on the rainbow a little bit, maybe go towards the middle and our understanding, on the journey. So we're moving on the journey. But one of the things is to understand, which is really important, is that, like I spoke about in my book in the 14 Keys, the concept of reciprocity, and that it's very difficult to ever give anyone what they give you, because you're constantly changing and they're constantly changing, and whatever they may give you changes because of the passage of time. We're made of molecules that are constantly vibrating and moving, and they're moving. They're either going up, down, left, right, around, diagonal, or directions that we don't even know about yet, right? So that means that nothing is ever staying the same. Even, let's see, we're 20 minutes into this segment. From when you first tuned in to now, 20 minutes later, you're a different person. You see, you're a different person. So you're constantly changing. So the idea of when you say myself or I, you're only speaking about your history. You're only speaking about your past. And, one of the things that made me think about this, I was meditating on the idea and lining up last night I was lining up the subjects for this strong. And I thought about a woman I used to work with years ago. And long story short, she worked for me actually. Let me get it straight because it's significant to the example. And she she's one of them know-it-all women. This was a program that I had for children years ago, and it was like an after-school program. And in fact, I wrote about it. One of the very first blogs that I put on that haruasan.com website, which is I had to take down recently, and I'm gonna put it back up. But I wrote about a young brother by the name of Malik. I named him Malik. That wasn't his actual real name, but the story was real, and it's out there somewhere. The actual story. But he was just a real problematic child, and one time he had tried to stab her in the eye with some scissors. And she was like, you know what? I'm never going to speak to you again. She said that to the little boy. He was 8 at the time. He was a mean little something too, boy. And I was the only one who could hold him down, and literally hold him down, literally physically, And his mother was even trying to get me to take him at one point. It's a whole long story, but I recognize that level of anger and having difficulty dealing with it. And I remember one time he was yelling at me, and he was calling me an idiot, and he was like, you idiot, stupid. He said, you a dumb Mexican. Just all these different words. He kept calling me a dumb idiot Mexican, right? Now, the boy wasn't Mexican, by the way. So when his mother arrived, I told her, I was like, yeah, these things he was saying to me. And she was like, I don't know where he got that from. She was like, oh, he must have got that from TV. I'm like, yeah, right. This is obviously what you say to this boy every day. So he's running back his history. And now he's shaping how people are going to respond to him and what his life is going to be based on the history that you've implanted into him. Now, I didn't say all that to her, but I said something, man. I don't remember what it was, but because she was one of the little, tough, little thuggish, ruggish, street mothers. And I'm like, don't let this kufi and this dashiki fool you. So she had her little, NIGGA wake up moment. I had said something to her, and I was like, yeah, go get your boyfriend if we need to work that out. And she came back actually with a mother, which was interesting because this was already a 30-something-year-old woman. And her mother came. She's like, I came all the way from North Carolina. I love my grandson. And I'm like, yeah. So it was a whole big thing. But eventually, by the time I was done with it, when the mother came, I guess she tried to sick her mother on me. By the time I was done with the mother was inviting me to dinner and was asking me if I'd like to take the boy for the strong ends. Every strong end because he needs a strong man like me in his life and, all this other foolishness. And I said, no, thank you. But so what I'm speaking about in this segment, there was a sister I worked with, long story, who began to treat the boy a certain way based on that one incident, which I couldn't blame her. Yeah, I mean, you want your eye. So if you have all rights to be upset about that. And she said, she was like, we are a collection of our history. This was a church woman. I liked her. I hired her because she was really good with activities. She was super activities queen, real good at just different like arts and crafts and stuff like that. That was where she really, really shined. Real strong, creative, myotic type, real organized and stuff. But she was a hyper church woman, always trying to get me to go to church with her and stuff. And I told her one day, I said, listen, if you invite me to church one more time, I'm going to fire you. And I said it just like that, straight face. And I was like, now get out my office. But she was like, yeah, you got to understand. And, she would always come in all these little lessons a pastor taught her. And, you can't go against that. When them church women tell you, my pastor says, you got to just, all right. She was like, we are our history. And our history is a collection of our experiences. And that's what makes us who we are. And, that's the fallacy of the self. The idea that what makes up the self is our history. You see, because what happens in that case, we forget that we're ever evolving and we're ever moving forward. So the self is not really actually your history. You create your newer self, or you create your newer destiny, or your newer positioning out of an addiction to your history. You see, so I didn't say all of that to her, by the way. I was like, oh, okay, all right. You know, um, as you've probably heard and seen, this times I'll invest myself in certain dialogues, and there's times I'll just, all right, and that was one of those times where I just was like, certain people you got to know, certain people are dead set on where they're going to be, and you can throw little testers out to see where they're at, but it doesn't make sense to establish that resentment, or to establish that tension and that strife. Sometimes people get really nervous, or they get really tense when they realize that maybe they've been saying something for a long time, and the entire time you've been gracious because you knew more than what they did about a particular subject. And sometimes once they find that out, they get really embarrassed, and then it gets tense. So, I've learned over the years how to play dumb, you know. Um, but these experiences are valuable. And plus it helps when you let people express themselves like that, and you let it flow out of them like that, then sometimes you'll also start getting down to the realness of them. And that's what we're speaking about in this segment, the authenticity, the authentic aspect, and the authentic projection that we all have inside of us, that we tend to hide a lot of times because of our fear of how people will respond to us. So just like when I was speaking to that parent, and because what happened was this. Now I remember the statement, and I don't think I put this in the blog. Matter of fact, I know I didn't, but I could say it. So Malik used to. Matter of fact, he threatened. He reached for the scissors and went to stab her in the eye. But I had another woman working for me as well, who I had to get rid of anyway. She wasn't about nothing, but 'cause she was a Buddhist. And I'm like, yo, we in the hood. All that like sitting down and you can't be meditating all day, man. No, And Malik actually punched her in the back, which could have went real left, And so eventually, but there was some other things that happened where she had to go. But so he actually had a reputation for hitting children and teachers. So one time he was wilding out and was trying to destroy my office. So I grabbed him, right? And I held him kind of like in a bear hug. I was sitting down in my chair. I snatched him and pulled him close to me. I wrapped my legs around his, and then wrapped my arms around his, and then put my head on the side of his head. And he was, get up. He's just like like the hawk. He's in a rage. And he was a thick little boy, Looked like he could have been my son, actually. Lighter complexion, mean looking eyes, big teeth. And so I'm holding him, and I said, listen, no matter how hard you struggle, you're not gonna be able to get away from me. You'll never be stronger than me, Malik. And I'm saying you're not gonna be stronger than me, no matter how hard you try. Go ahead, keep trying. And he just needed to feel that strength, so he kept trying, get off, yeah. Then he acted like he was gonna spit on me. Now that was when the levees broke, because I don't, we ain't doing that, So I said, listen, Malik, if you spit on me, and I was like, I had my head next to him, and I whispered, and I said, if you spit on me, I'm gonna beat your little ass. And I said it like that, right? So he kind of like, I felt him like his muscles kind of loosened up, like, all right, it got real. It done got real. Baba got real, So when his mother came, of course, I had to write up an incident report and everything like that. And I had told her that, listen, man, he hit an instructor in here, and luckily, I was real cool with her. So she wasn't gonna like, because she could have made a big funk about it, and oh, my back and I can't walk, and she could have got some money, and she was just like, listen, just keep him away from me. Keep him away from me. I'm not gonna make a big deal out of it, but I do not want to work with that one. So I told the mother, and I was like, listen, if he would have hit me, I would have hit him back. And then that's when she went off, and she was like, that's a child. That's a child. And I said, yeah. I said, I'm somebody's child too, so you probably want to teach him not to hit people, so that way he's not violating other people's children, So going forward with the idea, I didn't mean to make this about that particular situation so much, or that particular child or anything like that. Who he had a lot of challenges, and obviously I could, after meeting the mother and the grandmother, and and having to check her, because when she said that's a child, and you talking about you gonna hit my 8-year, and I'm like, listen, you could go off all you want, but if you go off too much, you might catch a backhand. Because she was all up in my face. I'm like, yo, and I told her one part, I was like, listen, you need to back up. I don't feel safe right now. You in my face, you got your sharp little fake fingernails all up in the air. Back up. And then I had to take her out into the hallway. And I was like, listen, I understand you're upset and everything like that, but if we weren't in this school building and we were on the block, and I said it to her just like that. I said, if we weren't in this school building and we were on the block, would you be up in my face like that? I said, really think about it. Think about what I'm saying. I said, you might not realize this, but I own this, which she didn't know. I said, yeah, this is my program. So I said, who are you going to report me to? I said, do you think that this program means more to me than my pride and my integrity? So I said, just think about what I'm saying to you. I'm not going to say it, but think about what I'm saying to you. If we were on the block, would you do this? So that was me being authentic in that moment, and making it clear that you're violating my personal boundaries right now. Your son has been violating everyone's boundaries, and I'm still showing him love, because I know what it's like to be angry, or to have someone insult you and be at an age where you can't really do much about it, but just take it out on other people. Because obviously she was bullying this boy. That's plain as day. And I know what that feels like, to just be in a situation where you're oppressed and can't really do much about it, other than just get angry, and take it out on those closest to you. So a lot of times we remove ourselves from the opportunity of being our true selves and being our authentic selves, because we're so afraid of what the reaction is going to be from other people. So like in that moment, I could have said, well, listen, I'm running this program. Things are going well. I have a bunch of other different site locations, but this was like kind of my base, this particular spot, because it was a big school that I was in, and I had like pretty much the entire, like, well, no, we weren't on the basement, but we had like this little sunken level. But it was a huge area that we had. So I made that kind of the base of operations for my programs. And the actual principal of that school, I was real cool with. He was a collegiate wrestler back in the days. So he and I used, we vibed on the whole just martial arts and fighting and wrestling and things. Because I also wrestled, years ago. So we had a great relationship. He and I, and he was a brother. So we were able, that was the other linkage. We were able to have those other kind of brother to brother conversations. But I was willing to like not be able to be there, because I was not a slave to the reactions of others or the perceptions of others. You see, so a lot of times we end up blocking our true light. We end up blocking our true projections. We'll let little pieces peek through once in a while. And those little pieces that peek through once in a while, we'll kind of pretend almost to be satisfied with that. And sometimes we don't realize, and everything builds up to another thing. It's the dialogue I had yesterday with you all about the little girl who said was slutting it out. And I was like, listen, let me tell you what a slut is. And was breaking it down to her like, yo, you can't be sexing for emotional fulfillment. That's, it doesn't work that way, because these boys, they're not sexing you for emotional fulfillment. It's uneven. So, but what happens is a lot of times we slut ourselves out in our everyday lives. We slut ourselves out in society. We sacrifice aspects of ourselves and aspects of our true expression because we constantly feel like we're in a fishbowl every day. We walk into a place, we feel like everybody's looking at us, or we have an interaction in a chat room online on YouTube, and we feel like everybody is zeroed in and cued in on that particular chat or that conversation, partly because sometimes we're really self-absorbed, but that self-absorption also comes because we think all eyes are on us. You see, so now once all eyes are on us, instead of saying this is an opportunity to be my real self, we use it as an opportunity to be what we think people will approve, what they'll approve of. And basically we're whoring ourselves out for stimulation, for the stimulation of external validation, because it's very quick. It's very transient, that level of approval. And if you put it on a scale between what you're getting in terms of those momentary stimulations of approval and what you're giving up, you realize, man, I'm slutting myself out. I'm giving away something that's really precious, and I'm not really getting much back. You see, and then what starts to happen is the more you do that, the more your life becomes surrounded by really people you don't like, because all of the people who are now in your periphery and within your cycle, we could say, now the people who are within your cycle, and I'm specifically saying that different than cipher, but in your cycle of your history to your present, your history to your present, history to your present, they reflect the aspects of you that you've had to become in order to gain folks' approval. And typically those are the aspects of you that you don't like, because they're not even of you. They're of your history. They're of your insecurities. They're of your external sense of validation. So then you look at your circle and you say, man, I don't even like any of these people. Or you might own a business and you're on the phone every day having to talk to people you don't even like. I'm not talking about y'all. I'm just, but you might be worried. And I'm just thinking about someone I know who has a business who complained about that with me recently. He was like, oh, I hate when the phone rings. And I told him, yeah, it's time to switch it up. But it's all a result of, because we're afraid to be our true selves. We're afraid to really speak our truth and be our truth. And you can only come to that place. See, a lot of times people will confuse that with being nasty or being rude. I say what the F I want to say, and not realizing it doesn't mean that per se. There's a balancing point of sacrificing too much and being obnoxious, so there's a balancing point in the middle, in a sense. And, a lot of times there's an emptiness that comes sometimes when we are moving too much in a space where we're sacrificing everything. Because if you look at it like this, if any of you have ever seen The Wiz, The Wiz is a scene with the lion, right? Coupe de Ville. And he's inside of the stone. He's a lion, but he's at the New York Library. He's inside of the stone. And his eyes are just going back and forth. I know, old movie. And they're talking around him, and then, of course, he jumps out of the stone, and I'm a mean old lion. You can say what you want. He's singing the songs and everything like that. But a lot of us are living the same exact way out of fear, because he was a cowardly lion, right? So he's living inside of that stone, and the only aspects of himself that he's letting get through are his eyes, what he's seeing. You see, so he's constantly looking out for external approval to see what the world is looking at, but he's encased the fullness of who and what he is in stone. So we don't really even know his real self, let alone he probably doesn't even know his real self, because it's based on a history of external approval. It's based on a history of external reaction. You see, so what I'm saying, when you look at it in this sense, when you look at it in the aspect of What are we giving? And what are we projecting outward? And what are we living authentically? You're going to look at it from this aspect in a real simple way. What am I attracting? You see? Now, when I'm living authentic and being my true self, it's going to mean this. Most likely, for all of you who are on the air right now, most likely, you're going to lose some friends. Okay? Make it real simple for you. Because a lot of people will look at that and say, okay, I'll just live my authentic self and life will be peachy keen. No, What's most likely going to happen first is a lot of the people you like, or not like, but a lot of people who are around you and who are currently giving you the thumbs up are going to give you the thumbs down. Okay? A lot of people are going to do that. I'll give you a good example. I've been given more open jewels, shining a little bit more light over the past, purposely, deliberately, believe it or not. Like I told you, I'm like a vampire. I'm not very emotional. So, whatever comes out, it comes out intentionally. If you go look at the videos for the past 7 to 10 days, and then look at the ones prior to that. My videos never get thumbs down. Never. Even the ones that got a whole bunch of views, they don't get thumbs down. Over the past 7 to 10 days, I've been getting thumbs down. Okay. Now, and I want y'all to understand something. I'm not saying that because I care about a thumbs down. All right. I spoke about something, and I do appreciate the words of encouragement, but I spoke about something recently about video views, and I was, because I have certain videos on the video on YouTube, not on this channel. I have about 8 YouTube channels with all different kinds of content. And I have some of those videos 60, 70, 100,000 views. This channel, which is like the baby, the infant of all my other channels, the views 1,000, 2,000 views, 600, 500, 300, basically none. I look at it like that, basically no views. And I don't say that to say I'm trying to get my views up. I don't care about that. Because honestly, I look at it like, because the way enlightenment and transformation is, I'll tell you what's interesting. If I get a video that, let's say, has 500 views, that's 500 people that are actually engaged. That's the difference with this channel and my other channels. Some of my other channels, the content is not as potent, or it's not even talking about self-development, because I got stuff that's, like I said, completely different than this stuff. But the stuff that does have a little hinge of self-development or whatever is not as potent. So it's got a whole lot more views, but the people are not as engaged with the information. So if I get 5 people here who listen, there's 500, I'm sorry, chances are 400 out of those are going to contact me or take a class. It's at that level with this one. So, it's different levels of it. But again, when you start to show more, you're going to lose more. You're going to lose more people out of your cipher. Because remember, those people who are currently in your cipher are in your cipher because they're aligned and connected to a false representation of yourself. It's very similar to this. When we're outside and the sun is beating down, we look for a shady spot. We look for a space where the sun is not heavy on us. And then what happens when the clouds part and the sun is able to show more of its glory? Not its full glory, of course, but more of it. What do? We go inside. We hide. We run. But there are certain creatures and organisms that don't have a problem with the sun showing its full presence. You see? So what happens is, when you start to live more authentically, there's a flow that comes through you, because it's like, again, a lion being encased in stone. If a lion's encased in stone, what's able to flow in and out of that lion's aura? Nothing. You see, nothing. So, and what's it going to attract? What's concrete going to attract? Dust, pigeon droppings, different parasites, ants. all the things that it doesn't really want on it. You see, so when it breaks out of the stone and says, okay, I'm going to be what it is that I desire to be, that I was born to be authentically, that I'm really feeling in the seat of my soul, then all of those ants, dust, pigeon droppings, and even the people who used to come and sit and take pictures on the stone lion and say, oh, I'm a tourist, I'm gonna take a picture on sitting on top of this lion, pretending to ride it, abusing all kind of ways, urinating behind it, things. All those people now can't enjoy that experience. Of course, they're gonna say, "Oh, well, why can't you be the way you were before? What happened to my old lion? What is this new lion? What is this? What are you doing?" You see. But then there's a whole nother crew of people who will appreciate the authentic one. You see. But it takes some time now, because now you have to magnetize those individuals into your life. You see. And you have to magnetize those who are also living a healthy and natural order back into your life again. You see, so it's no different than when we look at it in terms of all of the things that we want to manifest in our life, which are our natural and normal part of our birthright, like health, wealth, family, friends, fortune. And when I say fortune, I'm not speaking about money per se. I'm just speaking about good fortune, being able to magnetize those things back into our lives requires authenticity, because there's a certain flow. And when we're not authentic, we put an encasement of stone and stubbornness around us because we're seeking external validation. You see, we're not being authentic to our trueness. Now, of course, just like if I'm doing these segments and I say, well, listen, and I want you to pay attention. Like I said, I'm not, I didn't get that chip. I didn't get the emotional chip, that a lot of other people have, I was thinking about someone that's dawning actually, a good friend of mine. He's no longer with us in the physical, but still very much present in the spiritual. But years ago, when we were real young, he was a gentleman in the game. He was a gentleman of leisure, and he used to always. He actually had gotten out of the game because he was what we call a gorilla P, and I had spoken to him one day, about a situation he had where. I saw him and he had this big slice under his neck, and, he died with that. So he had a huge scar. And I said, yo, somebody tried to end you. What happened? And, he told me the stories, something happened with a girl and her man and, the usual. And I guess after it happened, he ended up grabbing the girl and the guy, him and his other cousin, and holding them over a bridge, and they were threatening to throw him across over the bridge and everything like that. So, I was breaking down to him, how he could have handled the situation a little bit differently, and could have ended up without the huge scar underneath his neck and everything like that. And it was so funny because he was saying, you one of the coldest people I know. He's like, I wonder if you even have a heart. He's talking to me. And he said it's just funny when I hear you give this type of advice, in terms of how to handle situations, because you're able to keep things calm around you because you're so cold. And I said, yeah, well, I didn't really get that. You're a werewolf. And I was telling him, you're not really even built for that profession that you're in because you're too much of a werewolf. I'm a vampire, and the werewolf, they're warm, they get hot, they get upset, things happen and they kill everybody. Their claws come out, they transform into the beast, and then what do they do after all the time? They're somewhere naked in the woods or just with a pair of pants on crying. What did I do? Oh my God. Because they black out. Whereas the vampire, everything is premeditated. They may do the same vicious acts of the werewolf, but it's premeditated, but they sacrifice their humanity, as a result of it. They don't get that. So, everybody has their own gifts and their own curse, I guess you could say, in that sense. But if you look at, again, the premeditated path and trail, some have picked up on it, some haven't, some have, of enlightenment and transformation from some of the earlier shows where I was just talking about Orisha to today. You're going to notice a change in cadence, a change in content, and a change in spirit, right? And believe it or not, it's premeditated. It wasn't accidental. Just like as we create life, when we create life or a creator creates life, it has to negate itself in order to extend itself. So sometimes for a moment, and this is where I'm speaking about, sometimes we may encase a part of ourselves for a moment. But if you're able to do, not everyone can do that, but if you're able to do that from a premeditated sense, right? If you're able to pull back and say, okay, this group of people needs this, or this group of people needs that, and in the fullness of my form, they won't be able to receive it from me. But I know I can give it to them. I can bring value into their lives, but I can't do it in my fullness. So I'll come down a step, or maybe come down 10 steps, and negate myself in order to create a better experience for them. And then once I get that group of people, then I may then find another group of people where I'll say, okay, you know what, I need to help that group of people. So maybe I have to become something in that moment. See, when you're doing this work and you're involved in a ministry of unconditional service, not servant, like I've said before, but when you're providing that level of service to the family, what you have to do in many senses is learn how to be different things in the moment. You have to almost be somewhat of a chameleon in a way. You have to learn how to morph, basically. You have to learn how to morph. Okay, so like bringing certain mentalities or certain thought patterns to a certain group of people may require you to kind of do a little psyops, kind of infiltrate that particular group in order to introduce an idea. Okay, and that may have to require you to encase yourself or to cover yourself. So if you look in the beginning, all we talked was Orisha, right? Then we went from Orisha, to speaking more about community rearing, self-actualization, self-development, psychology, relationships. Now, this occurred over a span of years, not over a month, not over 3 months. We're going back from 2010. We're now, 2011, around there, end of 2010, 2011, when the show started, to now 2017. See, sometimes you got to sit back in a real cold way and premeditate, you see, and think about how you want to really map things out. Really think ahead to the future, you see. And so sometimes there are times where you have to, or you desire to, or you allow yourself to pull back and say, okay, you know what? I'm going to negate myself a little bit to get this done. But eventually the clouds will part and the sun is going to come out. And the fullness of the sun is going to come out. And what's going to happen in that moment is that some of those people may scatter. Some may not. Some may still appreciate the sun or the light that's inside of you and say, okay, yeah, I still appreciate the light that's in you. I just can't be with you on every part of this journey because maybe I can't stand it. Maybe I'm not strong enough to be around that on every part of this journey, you see. So it's the same thing in our everyday waking life, in our everyday working life. We begin to magnetize things to us that we may not desire when we get stuck in the history instead of the forward thinking and recognizing that we're constantly evolving, we're constantly changing. So there's no point and there's no reason for us to use our history as the guide stick to say who and what I am. See, that becomes very dangerous when you use your guide stick of history to define who and what you are. And I'm going to tell you why. I've kind of spoken about this previously. But I'm gonna explain again one of the biggest dangers of using history as your particular I don't want to say guide stick, but using history as your measuring stick for where you are and who you are. All right, we're gonna let's do a PSA real quick, and I'm gonna come right back with this.
This is another Chief Yuya PSA. Between man and woman gender assignment, oftentimes we cross one another's boundaries. Again, because we live in a society that teaches us to do so, it maintains the status quo of power and decentralizes the power that could exist within the family units and within the people. If I were to undermine or remove the opportunity and the ability for a woman to be a woman at her very base needs, remove the opportunity and the ability for her to have a menstrual cycle, for her to breastfeed, for her to give birth to children, for her to nourish and nurture and care for her family, we all have a role to play. So in that, it would be no less insidious, no less disrespectful, and no less destructive and harmful to an individual, to a community, or to a family if she undermined or sought to take away my ability to lead, my right and authority, my intelligence, and my divine positioning as leader and guide to myself, my woman, my children, my entire nuclear and extended family unit, and as well as my community. Sadly, we live in a time where that is the consistent and perpetual aim of many people. And speaking as a melanoid man, I have experienced this tremendously. Sometimes what may seem very small because it's second nature, so it seems small to many people, is most insidious. If I'm speaking to someone who comes to me with a pseudo recognition of my authority and intellect, and they seek to undermine that authority and intellect through gesturing, through disrespectful gesticulation, through rebellion, whether that rebellion be through words, be through actions, or even be through body language, it is no less vile or insidious to try to undermine my manhood than would it be for me to try to undermine a female's womanhood. If I cannot respect a certain female's womanhood, then I should be nowhere near her, and I certainly shouldn't claim to be a part of her community, because in that case, I don't really see her as a woman, and vice versa. As a chief, I should not be asked questions or even called a chief or called a baba if I am not given the full rights and authority. Now understand, a real chief, a real baba, a real community leader, a real father is not going to wait for you to give them those rights in order for them to move and act in that purpose and divine call. So when you behave anything outside of that, which really is disrespectful, they're going to alert you to it, and you may not be aware of it because your disrespect and undermining and overall Willie Lynchism has become second nature to you. This also must stop. This has been a Chief Yuya PSA.
All right, all right. So we're back, everyone, of course. And I told you I got to start hitting you with PSAs now because I got to drill this into you. It's got to be in you. It can't be on you. All right. And also, I wanted some time to scan some of the chats for any questions that may have been asked of me. But I saw a couple things here that I felt, could be of value to you all if highlighted. I know Brother Haru has since left the room. He said Odabo earlier, but he said earlier in the chat, I noticed that these shows strangely prelude conversations I had on the day to day with people I deal with. Somehow these topics come up in the all strong, LOL. Yeah, because remember, when you're living your authentic self, you're going to attract other people with a similar vibration to you. That's why every time I'm doing these shows, well, there's two reasons why this happens. A lot of times people will say, I feel like you were talking to me. Were you talking to me? And I've even had people get offended because they thought I had based shows around them. No, but I feel things. I don't want to get too deep into that one, but I feel people, and I feel you all, and I feel what you all need to hear. All right, so, but I don't want you to think that I don't want you to get spooked out, so I don't want to go too deep into that. But yeah, of course, if I'm being authentic, now there's certain people that don't want to hear me. There's certain people that will say, I don't like his voice. I don't like his accent. I don't like whatever. I don't like his information or just the way. It may not even be the information. I'm not feeling him. I'm not feeling his frequency. I'm not feeling his vibe. That's fine. Like I said, you're going to lose some people, but you're going to gain some people as well, because when you're a chief or a coordinator, those who come under your umbrella and under your protection and your guidance are usually going to reflect your actual spirit. You see, so that's why you're going to often feel that like, wow, this is the same stuff I'm going through or speaking about, because your chief or your coordinator has to be forward thinking in order to stay in season. So I'm always going to be a couple of steps ahead of you all. You might be like, wow, you were talking about this and then that, then this and then that. That's why there's divination and things like that. I haven't done some segments maybe in a year or so where I've gone, deep and heavy into maybe the indigenous spirituality, but don't forget, that's what I do. So this is not just me sitting up here talking about psychological things. There's a whole spiritual aspect that comes behind the things that I even choose to talk about for the month and stuff like that. All of those things are divined on. Okay. He also said something. He said, well, how does that play off the affirmation I am, quote unquote, especially how the Bible bumpers use it? Well, I don't care how Bible bumpers use anything, or Bible thumpers, but I am is whatever I choose to be. I am is one of the greatest affirmations that you can ever utilize. But again, when you're saying I am, you have to understand just the very nature and the very essence of how energy moves. It moves. So I am is forever evolving. That's why when you say God is the great I am, well, I am what? Because our definition of what a person or what a thing can be evolves through the ages. That's the essence of it. So it's the ever evolving what is or what could be. So when you say I am, it's also a very self-actualizing statement. Not I want to be, I think I could be, I'm trying to be, but I am this. You see, so now you're creating a reality, a definite and proclamating authoritative reality. We spoke about authority yesterday on Chief Speaks, even through your own speaking, which now extends outwards into the world in that same sense. So, that's the value and the science of that. Also, there was a comment right underneath it that I felt is worth mentioning. Vivid Eye Publication says, interesting. I have never really thought of the concept of self like that. I always considered it an amalgamation of your soul reincarnating and taking on certain energies of the time period you have returned to. Right. So even if we look at it like that, right? And I'll say it again for those of you who didn't get in all the words. Interesting. I never really thought of the concept of self like that. I always considered it an amalgamation of your soul reincarnation and taking on certain energies at the time period you have returned to. The time period you have returned to, right? So basically you're saying, when you say the time period, you're talking about when you were born. So let's say if you were born 15, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, right? We're in a new period now. So you still have this, there still has to be an admission there that, even if I say, okay, the I is, the amalgamation of my soul energy, you're still basing that off of history, which is a problem. Because the soul is, remember, it's a spiral. It's constantly moving forward to evolve to the next space in order to evolve the overall collective. And if you're looking at it in terms of time period, then you're missing it, because the soul is not really dealing with time like you might think. It's not dealing with dispensation and season in the same way that the spirit is, which is different. And you are not your spirit. Your spirit is a part of you, but you're not the spirit. Think about that for a second. If it makes sense to you. If not, I'll break it down more. But so no, even in that idea, it's still, you're basing it on a time. That's the same thing as getting caught up in like the zodiac. I was born a Libra, let's say. So now my entire life, I'm constantly focused on the events surrounding my birth. So that shapes my future, because all I'm looking at is the past, as opposed to saying, have I ever regenerated or rebirthed in this life? And if so, can I be more forward thinking? You see, now that's the authentic positioning and state of the actual, of your energy, of your soul, of the universe. And anytime you function outside of that, you're not functioning in the sense of trueness, of realness in its actualized state, of truth in its actualized state. You're not functioning in that state, you see, because you're still functioning based on a history. And what I shared was, I would explain why that it becomes so dangerous to do this when we're moving through the world, when we're moving through life. And essentially it's because of this. Whenever you're presented with the opportunity to grow and to expand, because ultimately you came here to grow and to expand. I don't care what system you're working with. I don't care what ideology, what spirituality, that you position yourself with. You came here to explore. The only reason you're even listening to me right now is because you're an explorer. That's it. You're exploring your own mind. You're exploring your own thoughts. You're not necessarily exploring mine, but you're using the keys that I'm giving you to open up different parts of your own mind, which of course opens up different parts of your own world reality. You're exploring. I'm a navigator. I'm just saying, you can go that way, you can go that way, or you can make a left and go this way. Be careful over there. The waters are rough there. You might want to do it this way or that way, but ultimately do what you feel like doing. Right? So that's all I'm doing. I'm a Moorish navigator. So now what happens is, when you start to get locked into your history, and even being careful with that, the I am aspect, right? As opposed to I am being. You gotta put the tail on it. If you don't put the funk on it, then you ain't really got nothing. And the funk is the being. We already know that, because even in melanoid societies, we use that word be like hot sauce. I'll be here, I'll be doing this, I'll be doing that. Be is very important in terms of our vernacular and our personal ethnic lexicon, the aspect of be. So it extends beyond the I am, you see. And that's not to take anything away from the concept or the phraseology of saying I am something, or I am this, or I am that. But essentially, when you're being something, you're evolving something. Being is not a static position. And that's where it becomes dangerous, when you look at life in a static sense. Nothing about your liberty is static. So if someone says, well, hey man, let's do this or let's do that, and you say, well, I can't see myself doing that. Hey, let's go over here and let's do these rituals. Nah, I'm not really into that. I like to do rituals by myself. They're having a drum circle over there. Let's go do a drum circle. Nah, I don't like the people in the drum circle. So nah, that's why I pretty much, I drum with these people over here. We have all of these different rules that create a static personality of what we are willing or unwilling to do. You see, and that's not the essence of being. The essence of being is the essence of evolving, of dynamism. You're dynamically changing and moving, you see. But here, and when I say here, I'm talking about in this three-dimensional reality, we lock ourselves into static thinking, where we use our history to encase ourselves in stone, based on this, that. Like I've spoken before, even in education, I have friends who, when they were younger, they went through the special education system. So to this day, 30, 40, 50 years old, will say, I'll say, well, hey man, we could do this, do that, or maybe they'll add up something wrong. We might be in Home Depot or something, and they'll add up something wrong. And they say, well, I was special ed. So, what does that have to do anything? So now you've allowed that stigma of special. That's why that stigma is so dangerous. And be careful with that whole, when them teachers are suggesting that the special ed and all of that, which is another topic, but that stigma a lot of times stays with people. You see, and they use it as a fallback as to why they won't venture out to do certain things, or why certain things don't manifest for them in their life. So it becomes very dangerous in that sense when you forget that being is dynamic. It has to change. It has to morph. And if it's not changing and morphing, then it's locked into a static thinking. And a lot of times, from a philosophical perspective, we see ourselves as static beings. We see our experiences as being static. We see life as being very static. Well, that's just the way life is. We'll say things like that. But life is like the wind. It's ever moving. It's ever growing. Who can actually define life but life? So as beings walking on this planet, living this experience, the only thing that we actually have is awareness of life. See, now our awareness of life, we confuse that and think that that's the self. What we're witnessing and what we're experiencing and our chronicled history, we now translate that into, this is who I am. No, this is what you saw. And the truth is, this is life being aware of itself, observing itself, but it's constantly moving. You see, it's like falling from the sky. And as you're falling, you're in a ship, and the velocity is so intense that parts of the ship are falling off while it's falling down from outer space. So whatever you perceive to be the shape of the ship, it changes constantly because of the actual movement and velocity of its journey. So you can't say that it's one thing. By the time you get to the planet, it may just be you holding the steering wheel. There may be nothing left, you see, which is ultimately the point, isn't it? To completely strip away all of the levels, so that way we can present and project our truest self, and then we can present and attract the truest things, like wealth, into our life. You can't get wealth into your life if you're not projecting your real self. That's why if you read a lot of books on business and wealth and money making and investing, a lot of times people are interviewed who have, of course, achieved certain things in those areas, but you'll find that they always have a unique way of establishing themselves, which are noteworthy. They end up in books. This one does this. This one puts money in clear jars for children so they can see how much they're earning. This one does that. And many of these experiences, this wisdom that these people have, is it comes from didactic learning. They're self-taught. They're not regurgitating and using repetition of of another social or religious, or political structure to say, okay, well, this is how we have to do things. They're just being authentic in what they're doing, and as a result, they're attracting wealth. They're attracting riches. So a lot of times you read these books, this is the truth of it, and you say, okay, well, I'm going to do the same things that Warren Buffett did, or the same things that Donald Trump did, or the same things that Reginald Lewis did, or all these different people who have achieved a certain measure of financial success, and you may get a couple of extra bucks. You may get rich even in some sense, but you won't gain wealth, because whatever it is that they did authentically, and of course what happened when they did those things, people said, oh, this isn't going to work. They had investment partners who pulled out of deals. They lost marriages and families and all sorts of things, but then they gained other things later by being their authentic self. So you start to even see sometimes even your circle of relationships on some levels can also be dynamic. Of course, if you're surrounded by people who are more interested in staying encased in stone as opposed to evolving. Okay, so now I'm going to read something real quick. Brother Tareem says, I'm just glancing at the chat room while I'm speaking. I talk about the ancient times of Egypt all the time. I talk about the medicines and sciences we created and gave the world. Am I going the wrong way for reflecting that history all the time? Yeah, absolutely. You shouldn't do anything all the time. If you're doing anything all the time, yeah, it's problematic. There has to be a fluidity. There has to be a grace of movement between forwardness. That's the science of the Sankofa. We're moving forward, we're looking backwards, but clearly we're moving forward. We have the egg in our beak because we're picking up and grabbing the most valuable and crucial things from our past. But you have to scrutinize also those things from the past. Like you said, you speak about the ancient times of Egypt all the time, but are you Kemet? Do your people come from Kemet? And even when you say like the medicines and sciences we created, who's we? Because in all honesty, and I know people have an issue with this, but it's okay to say they. Especially if you have little to no knowledge of that medicine and sciences today. It's okay to say they. There are things that we have created in this now time, even on this godforsaken continent. There are things of great value that we've even created here that we can praise and be proud of as well. And on top of that, there are other kingdoms, great, powerful, beautiful kingdoms on a continent outside of Kemet. You see? So sometimes even the destination towards Kemet is a part of the historical stagnation. You get conscious, you only got a couple of choices. You either talk about Kemet, maybe you'll get into the Yoruba sign, you talk about Orisha, you might get into the Akan piece, or if you're a Rasta, you talk about Ethiopia. And that's it. It doesn't go anywhere else outside of there. Kemet, so West Africa, Kemet, Ethiopia. End of story. You see? So what I'm saying is that we need to look at it sometimes and look at why we even do that. You hear me mention Congo structure a lot. Well, we also have Tanzania and places like Kenya, places with a very rich culture, spiritual culture as well. Why don't we talk about that? There's so many different places. Morocco is also a part of the continent. We don't talk about Morocco much unless we're Muslims, of course, or we're claiming the Moorish title. But so what I'm saying is that, yeah, anything you're doing all the time is going to be problematic in that sense. And the idea of staying locked into a historical value of what maybe our ancestors, maybe, if you can trace yourself to that region, maybe our ancestors may have created You pretty much jocking the Yegun. Do your own thing. What? And not to say that we can't celebrate them, but every generation has to leave a mark. And it doesn't mean, we stand on the shoulders of our Yegun. It doesn't mean that you ignore them, but what's the mark that you're going to leave? And it's just an important thing to think about, in terms of future movement, because the reality is a lot of the codes and the things that we think we're still studying and we're going to go back and learn this and go back and learn that, we utilized it for a time period, but it's time now to utilize something else. It's like saying, okay, well, I'm going to study melanin, but I'm not going to study nanotechnology. But nanotechnology is based off of melanin. So meanwhile, you're living in a society now where people are using these things against you. You might be breathing in nanites right now, don't even know it. But you don't want to learn it. And I'm not saying you, Brother Tareem, I'm speaking in general. You may not want to learn it because you're so directed and facing the past. And again, your history is not what comprises of what you are, because you're forever and constantly evolving. And sometimes, and I know this is a hard thing to look at, sometimes we outgrow certain things. And we can't be afraid to take on the new things. Sometimes we look at things of our past and things of our ancient times, and we want to constantly recreate it, keep going back and recreating the will. And there's a beauty to that at certain times, especially when you're in ceremony. But just like I've often said, even when you look within the Ifa and Orisha community, and I know people don't like it when I say it, but there are people who do like it. People wear slave clothes all the time. Don't even think about what they're wearing. So you see that a lot of times in the Rasta community. And interesting enough, you primarily only see it with the women, which should kind of tell you something too. If you look at an old image of someone working in a field, on a plantation in the 1600s, and then fast forward and look at a bembe, and look at the style of dress. Again, look within the Rasta community. Chuck Taylor sneakers, long jean skirt, head wrap. There's a certain look. Where does that look come from? Even when we're using certain terms like sistren, brethren, those are biblical terms. You see? So there's nothing wrong with necessarily looking at the past and even in rejoicing in some of it, but we certainly should scrutinize it as well. Because sometimes we lock ourselves into certain patterns, even in our development, and don't realize that, man, these patterns have been set for you. You walking around, brethren, sistren, thinking you saying something outside of the structure, and you're not. You're actually going even closer to the origins of the structure by using certain terms, or you get conscious now, all of a sudden you gotta, again, like I said, dress like a slave. No. And I know many people will be offended by that idea, but, think about it. And again, there's some people you're going to hurt and offend. That's just how it is in life. You can't be so addicted to the external approval. I'm not addicted to external approval. That's not my addiction. Addiction to external approval is no different than addiction to cocaine or alcohol or sex or materialism. It's a quick and short high. Very quick, short high. It's not even really worth the high. External approval. It's not even a good high. It's not even a good high. The good highs come from the fulfillment that you experience by aligning with your soul's mission when you're doing it authentically. Like, let's try this. A lot of times when you hold back, even sometimes your anger, because, we're taught that we shouldn't be angry, right? And then everyone just takes that on. Don't be angry. Brother reached out to me recently about that, and he was saying that every time, he gets into something with his family, whatever, they call him like an angry black man, which makes him, he said, it just makes me more angry when they say that. And I said, listen, this is what you tell them. He was like, what do I say? And I said, this is your response. Tell them, it's a normal and natural human reaction to be angry in the face of injustice. That's it. And leave it right there. Don't say anything else. And he was like, yeah, that makes sense. I was like, right, but when you're angry, you can't think about things that make sense. Emotion and logic are not going to exist in the same place at the same time. Once somebody gets emotional, it just, all kind of dumbness flies out of their mouth. But I said it's a natural reaction to be angry in the face of injustice. So a lot of times in many senses, we're suppressing very real emotions that exist inside of us. And because we're looking for that short-term high, but the real fulfillment comes when you can be your authentic self. It's like sometimes you ever feel that feeling of total release and even catharsis when you curse somebody out, especially somebody who you could have cursed out at another time, but you chose not to because you didn't want them not to like you. You were afraid of how people were going to look at you, but you knew that what they were doing was completely wrong, and it was unjust. But you chose not to respond to it. You chose to allow yourself to be violated, because you were just so afraid that if you said something, that the person is going to look at you a certain way, and you didn't want them to look at you that way, or your family or your friends may look at you a certain way. But when you finally just say, you know what, F it, and you let them have it, afterwards, you darn near get aroused. You feel this feeling of invigoration because you're being your true self. Now, what happens in that moment? You may lose that quote unquote friend. Chances are they were never a friend anyway. If they were doing something to you and you didn't have a relationship where you could be open and honest about it. But in those particular situations, and you're blocking yourself and you're encasing yourself, you may do little things here and there and get that person or that tyrant's approval, because the only person that's ever afraid to hear the truth is a tyrant. That's the truth of it. That's how people become tyrants, because they don't want to hear the truth. So you now get that tyrant's approval, and you'll get the little pat on the head and you say, oh, and it's a little high just for a moment, but it's very brief. As opposed to when you curse them out, you'll be jumping around like Muhammad Ali. You'll be excited about it, and you'll go home and yeah. You'll be replaying the moment in your mind because it's empowering. So your authentic self attracts authentic experiences and authentic people. All right. That has been our segment. My chick is getting ready to come in and tell me what time it is. So, I don't want her to start beefing, because when she spazzes out, it gets crazy up in here. Here she comes. She coming, y'all.
90 seconds.
90 seconds. I told you. She lets me know what's what. But yeah. So that has been our segment. We'll be back tomorrow at 1 p.m. All right, and of course, and I'm glad you appreciate. I think it was Vivid Eye. One of you said, I'm sorry, that you appreciate seeing the subjects for the strong. Yeah, I put them all up ahead of time, and I'll look at the comments and stuff. Like I said, always comments in the video. Seconds. All right, sugar. And I'll keep the comments up, and and I'll take a look if you have any questions or anything like that. All right. So until such time, you all enjoy your day today, and do something productive. Of course, it's a day of wealth, but be your true self, and don't be afraid if you lose a fake ASS friend. Don't worry about it. If you lose a friend, you'll gain more. Don't be afraid to lose a high, of some food or some cake or some sex or whatever. Don't be afraid to lose that high, because what you'll gain in the fulfillment of being your true self will attract the world to you, literally. All right, peace, everyone.